December 1st, 2021, 6 girls took the world by storm. What was already a well-anticipated debut defied all expectations and excelled above what anyone could have imagined these girls would achieve beforehand. It was rare to find a discussion not mentioning their names, and before anyone knew it, all eyes were on IVE. But was it all just a ruse this whole time? A means to distract us from their crumbling walls, hiding the truth that lies within? Buckle your seatbelts, travelers, because today we go beyond the walls and into the Crumbling Palace.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You make me feel like 11.
11 takes place on the outer edge of the city limits. Breathtaking but rather bizarre visuals grace this land with their outlandish designs and interesting architecture. The video was shot in a way that makes the land seem expansive. Strikingly blue skies that seem to fill the whole screen, offsetting the black nothingness that seems to be used in place of walls. It creates this feeling of grandness, like whatever world we're introduced to is much larger than our own. The glass they dance on, decorated like a ballroom floor, begins to feel less like a floor and more like a stage, centering the girls in all their glory without any distractions around them to distract you from their song and dance. It's a beautiful world, but the deeper you dig, the more strange it becomes. The first time we ever see these girls together on screen, they're surrounded in this metallic tunnel, their own reflections creating visual effects around them. It's a tight fit, and even if you were to look away, you'd only be met with a mirror image of the girls anyways. Even the rest of this video is shot with incomplete shots of rather interesting but also nearly eerie scenes and places. The girls are always the center of attention, almost as if they're trying to distract you from the mess going on around them. Even the song itself is awkwardly paced at times, slowing down as if it's losing momentum only to burst back into a distracting melody once more. It's misdirection at its finest, and it's what gives IVE this sort of dark fantasy attribute. The girls are the sirens sent to lure sailors in, and the biggest obstacle in their way is distracting them from the world crumbling all around them. And what's the best way to do that? Become the center of attention themselves. IVE's lore has been talked about a lot, comparing it to different myths and tales and what matches up and what doesn't. One of the more talked about ones being the story of Narcissus, a man that was cursed to be so in love with himself that he ended up neglecting all other basic needs, besides staring at his own reflection until his inevitable doom. While this is more prominent in the Love Dive video, the basis of the myth is very prominent here as well. Many parts of this video showed multiple reflections of the girls, one of my favorites being Yujin quite literally staring into a mirror with a rippling water effect around it, likely hitting at the puddle of water talked about in some versions of the myth of Narcissus. However, possibly my favorite hint at any myth in this music video, though admittedly I may be reaching a little bit here, is the attention to their eyes. The eye is almost always involved in myths about knowledge and information, whether it's the Greeks' passing of their shared eye around to give information to different demigods, or the epic of Nobody and his way of outsmarting man-eating titans. Either way, the eye is almost always seen as a passage of information. One of my favorite myths surrounding the theme, though, takes us away from Greek mythology completely and introduces us to the Norse sun god Odin. Odin was often depicted with one eye, and the story goes that he gave his eye to Mimir, a being known for its incredible knowledge, in exchange for some of his own. He was often depicted as desperate for information and would not hesitate to lie, cheat, or deceit to get it. Despite all this though, he was well loved by both his followers and other gods and beings. He was quite literally the god of gods in Norse mythology and was depicted as a great leader despite his less than moral attributes. Really, his only downfall was his greed for knowledge, much like IVE and their lovable exterior ever so slightly tainted by the desire to distract us from what we want to understand. But how does this tie into IVE? How does their inherited narcissism and apparent need to hide what they know tie into their lore? Well, as I said before, it's a distraction and nothing more. They lull us into a false sense of security, distracting us from the dystopia around them and leading us down a path of no return. What they're after is still unclear, though it is obvious that they're hiding something. Between whispered melodies and a crumbling palace, there's something hidden between the cracks, something they're not telling us. a dark illusion they hide from us all, keeping hidden to themselves until it's already too late. It's just a glimpse here, an unsettling gut feeling that maybe everything isn't as it seems, but it's there, and Love Dive only confirms these suspicions. Love Dive finally brings us into the heart of the city. A lovely, almost doll-like mansion sits in the very center, overlooking all of the city's inhabitants from every possible angle. It's coated in pinks and blues, a striking difference from the black space and monotone colors of 11. While their debut seemed a bit out of pocket, it didn't seem too different from the natural world around us. However, Love Dive shows us how different our two worlds really are. From gardens we've only seen in dreams before to a late-night visit to the clouds themselves, IVE shows us for the first time how different and magical the world we've been introduced to really is. Love Dive as a song keeps up with the darker tendencies with a light integration factor that 11 had. From a low and empty pre-chorus to a full and bold chorus, the song practically echoes the same sentiment as 11, a fantasy with a darker twist. The same themes are still prevalent throughout the music video as well, a near constant focus to their eyes, as well as narcissism being quite literally called out in the lyrics of the song. The girls are still dancing on beautifully decorated stages, still trying to distract you from what's going on behind the walls that now we can visibly see. But there is one glaring addition to the equation this time: the presence of Cupid. Neon pink and blue arrows transform this world into an oddity, striking visuals once again distracting you from the weirdness of it all. The girls steal our attention as Cupid himself strikes each and every one of us with his heart-shaped arrows, straight through the heart, capturing us for the final time in this world, not allowing us to leave. I'm sure you know the story of Cupid, the Roman god often depicted as an infant with a bow and quiver striking strangers with his arrows in order to make them fall in love. But even with his sometimes mischievous tendencies, Cupid himself just seems a bit too bright and happy for a romance based on narcissism. But maybe there is some deeper meaning yet. Cupid's parents were an unlikely couple: Venus, the goddess of beauty, and Mars, who was a war god. Both well loved by the people for their ventures, though an awkward pairing nevertheless. And though Cupid was never seen anywhere near the battlefield, his father's ties to such led him to sometimes being depicted in battle armor alongside his menacing bow and arrow, a reference to the harshness of love and the battlefield it can often create. It is also important to note that Cupid is usually seen flying around with a pair of angel wings, something we see everywhere in this music video as well, yet something feels off. A wall of white feathered wings pinned to it like butterflies on the board, spread out for display instead of letting their beauty shine in the wild. The girls dance in front of some of these wings, though they're never attached, as if they want us to believe those wings are their own and not stolen from the ethereal beings in their final moments. And yet, as soon as we start to suspect something is wrong, the world shifts back into this pink and blue wonderland and we forget what we were worried about in the first place. It's a constant back and forth of the girls struggling to keep our attention, distracting us from the mansion's secrets. But it seems this time we got a little too close.
What's after life? You and I is more than life.
Afterlife forces the girls to tone it down a bit. We're suddenly dropped back off into our own world, and even though the scenes the girls decide to show us are still beautiful, they don't feel as fantastical as the ones before. We got too close to their secret, so they had to make it seem as if it all was just a lie to begin with. This time we see the camera and special effects in action. Scenes that could be bizarre and wonderful with editing tricks and special effects are shot too wide and show us the happenings in real time, ruining the illusion. I think Yujin's scene with the cardboard hearts illustrates this the best. We start off with this oddly familiar neon pink shade, like a glimpse back to what once was, the staircase between our worlds, but then we zoom in and see these paper hearts fill the frame with their disappointingly humane-like motions. Even the song itself feels more familiar, Despite its princess-like atmosphere, it's constant in its rhythm and it doesn't dip and rise like the songs before it. It's like a slap back into reality. The girls are trying to tell us that it was all just fake this whole time, that there's nothing to be really concerned about. This narrative, along with the modern princess charms, reminds me a lot of the movie Enchanted. It's about a princess with a near-perfect life who was tricked by a bitter and evil queen and was pushed down a well and into the streets of Manhattan. The movie is basically her adapting to living in the modern world, learning the ways of society so as to not stand out so much. Although she is sweet and loving by nature, there are a few lessons she learns along the way of her journey that end up making her into a better person. I've always really liked this movie as it takes a lot of the qualities that these princesses usually have to make them seem perfect, stick them into the modern world, and watch them be torn apart and reconstructed again to fit a better narrative. Someone who thinks they are beautiful and perfect in every way wouldn't be well liked in our world, yet in these movies that's often seen as a desirable attribute, though they are usually coded in a bit better. It might not be an exact 1-to-1 ratio, but I think a lot of the same themes apply here. Watching Afterlife is like waking up in the modern world after dreaming of a fantasy. It's better in some ways, but worse in others. Afterlife feels cheap. Not in the budget or the effort put into it, but in a way to disguise and hide the fantasy they've built so far. It's a lighter feeling, easier on the ears, as if it's trying to fit in with the soundscape of other songs today. It's unusually usual for them. The question is, was it all fake this whole time? Or did we really get too close to the cracks in their crumbling palace?